Like, I would definitely say I was in that camp. When I started hearing this new term hybrid, I was like, what is that? I always was like, well, isn't CrossFit hybrid? And then the more that I kind of looked at it and started to break it down and also just talk to people and kind of go a little bit deeper, it's like, no, they aren't the same.
Welcome back to the IBEX Training podcast. My name is Patrick and we're here with my wife, Kristi. Today, we're going to be talking about training and how you guys can maybe choose or figure out what the best training style for you and your goals is going to be. Kristi and I are both lifelong athletes. I grew up in the action sports, and Kristi was more of an endurance athlete. She competed at the CrossFit Games, and now we're circling back to headed out actually tomorrow for the Mesa Marathon, where she's going to try to run a sub 3 hour. So we'll give you guys a little bit of insight on how we've gotten to where we are, the training styles that we have kind of worked through over the years, and maybe give you guys some insights into, what training looks like and how to choose what's going to be best for you.
I'm so excited to talk about training. And for me, it actually started in the pool, which I think is really fun and a fun fact to share. A lot of people don't really realize that. But I swam for the University of Louisville, which was a D1 school, go Cards, and it was a total blast. But when I got done with college, what I didn't realize about myself was that I just wasn't done pushing my limits yet. And so I went into endurance training. I started running marathons. I ran Boston, New York. I then got into triathlons, doing several Olympic distance triathlons. I even went and competed at the age group nationals in Burlington, Vermont. And then I did a half Ironman. So I really went down this rabbit hole of endurance sports. And then I found CrossFit. So in 2013, I found CrossFit while I was doing all this endurance stuff. Recently graduated from college. And I decided I loved having this shift of focus. I loved feeling strong. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, bye, see ya, endurance world. And I just put all my chips into this basket because I just became obsessed. And then in 2016, I qualified for my first CrossFit Games. So I was having this endurance background and then building all of this strength, now focused on CrossFit, which has led to just a really interesting trajectory over all these years for me when it comes to training.
I grew up, I played some sports. I played basketball, soccer, baseball was kind of my primary sport, but I moved out to Portland, Oregon at the end of 8th grade. And then going into 9th grade, my freshman year, we were in Portland, which is close enough to the mountain that my high school team had a snowboard team. And for me, that was drastically more appealing than going out and running laps around the track or getting hit by people on the football team. I had zero interest in that, and all of my time was spent outside. So it was all action sports, a lot of snowboarding, probably hundreds of trips to the mountain by the time I was 20 years old, skateboarding, mountain biking, hiking, climbing, the beach. That was all of my physical activity. And it was definitely very athletic, but there was no structured training. And I can't even, when I was in high school, the thought of going to a gym literally never even crossed my mind. And nobody in my circles that I was hanging out with did either. So that was just a completely foreign thought. And I started working out after high school, after I got out of high school, and pretty quickly found CrossFit. And CrossFit, I think, felt pretty similar to the action sports, or felt closer than maybe just going to the gym and doing a little bit more of the traditional stuff, which I kind of started with. But as soon as I found CrossFit, that just felt much more natural to me. And it felt like a sport. And there was a lot going on that made it interesting. And since then, we've trained a lot of different domains. We've trained a lot of different places, whether that, spent a couple of years training down at Westside Barbell, made it all the way to the CrossFit Games 7 times with Kristi. We've done a lot of endurance sports, and the way we train and the way we train other people has definitely evolved over that time.
We've definitely learned a ton. And I think having the endurance background, spending so much time there, and then also seeing what it takes to get to the CrossFit Games 7 times, having gotten to train at Westside Barbell, having your action sports background, and also both of us seeing things very differently. So you come from the less structured, doing all the fun things, living life outside, and I was very regimented and very structured. I can't imagine having not gone to a gym. Like when I was swimming, we were even doing dry land back then when I was in high school. And it wasn't like lifting weights the way that I did in CrossFit, but there was always some sort of resistance training built in. And I just always had this love for it. Like I was always so interested, not understanding kind of all the little nuances that go into it, but it wasn't necessarily how strong can you get, because a lot of swimmers, you'll see swimmers like it's not like their 1 rep maxes are through the roof. Like I wasn't strong. It was definitely a different style of weight training, but I was in a weight room and I did go to a gym. So I was familiar with that stuff. CrossFit just opened my eyes to a whole new endless realm of what's possible. And so I was like, wow, this stuff is crazy. This is wild. Like I never thought I could do the Olympic weightlifting things. And so I just think that it absolutely just completely opened my eyes to what is possible.
And I think something that's been maybe a little bit of a unique perspective for us is that we've learned a lot about training and what that takes to be one of the best in the world at a sport. And we've also run a gym and coached thousands of classes, thousands of people one-on-one, and what it takes to move the needle for people who aren't training to be the best in the world of the sport, but are training to get fitter, leaner, and enjoy fitness. So I think we've learned a lot from kind of both those aspects, which are really different, but do have crossover. And CrossFit has evolved quite a bit over the past, decade. And now we've got hybrid training, which is different than CrossFit, but there are some similarities. And though there's definitions for both of them, I think if you ask 10 different people, you'd probably get 10 different answers of people who do CrossFit and people who do hybrid training. And if you go into 10 different gyms, the programming is going to look completely different. And if you ask, for some people, hybrid training means running. For some people, it means biking and swimming. For some people, it's a combination of all of those along with strength training. But there are some commonalities that both of them have and are kind of the fundamentals for fitness. And that's going to be strength training and conditioning. And, we like to add a lot of like bodybuilding type movements in there as well for hypertrophy work. And then you can kind of complement those with a little bit of a bias towards some of the more specific things that are going to help you reach your goals.
Yeah, I think you're right when you look at it and you say people could have like 10 different explanations. Like I would definitely say I was in that camp. When I started hearing this new term hybrid, I was like, what is that? I always was like, well, isn't CrossFit hybrid? And then the more that I kind of looked at it and started to break it down and also just talk to people and kind of go a little bit deeper, it's like, no, they aren't the same thing, but there is a lot of crossover. If you do ask 10 different people, they might have 10 different answers. And I would honestly say that I was one of those people that I had a hard time understanding the definition of hybrid when you really first started to hear that term. Running and weightlifting is really what I thought of, but there's a lot more that plays into that. And that could be cycling, that could be swimming, there could be lots of different things. And then you also have CrossFit, and it's like, well, is CrossFit a hybrid athlete? Well, I do believe that CrossFit can kind of cross over, and there's a lot of crossover there. But what I would say is that CrossFit has a lot more higher skill. And so the barrier to entry into those higher levels is going to be a little bit different. Like you're going to need more access to more equipment, most likely. So learning Olympic weightlifting, that is a very, very technical skill that takes years to master. Learning ring muscle ups and all the gymnastics pieces, all the strict handstand push-ups, the handstand walking, all of that stuff, that's not stuff that you're just doing if you weren't put into gymnastics as a kid. Then you even have the ergs. So there's a lot of technique that goes into the ski erg, into the rowing machine. And yes, you can get on them and go, but if you really want to be good at it, you have to learn how to use that machine. And so I think there's a lot of skill that comes along with that CrossFit, and you're going to find a lot more higher intensity, kind of randomized training where you're training for, if you guys have heard that slogan, training for the unknown and unknowable, which to me is completely opposite from the hybrid training, where I know that I'm training for 26.2 miles and I can look at the course profile and I can see the elevation, or I know that I'm training for this 1 rep max in my deadlift and I can follow progressive overload to get me there.
Also, just kind of put this out there, like we're not saying that like we're not pitting CrossFit or hybrid training against each other. We love all things fitness. We've done every possible kind of fitness you can imagine over the past couple of decades. And the more people doing fitness, the better. So whether you're doing jazzercise or kickboxing, CrossFit or hybrid training, like the more people out moving, lifting weights and getting fit, the better. But we're just trying to talk about some of the differences in how you guys can structure your training to get the most out of it and head in the direction of the goals that you have. And I think even CrossFit branches off and starts looking very different from a gym setting where everybody's showing up for a class to participate in CrossFit, and then training for the competitive side. And I think that it's interesting, the more you start training for the competitive side, the less your training looks like traditional CrossFit. And the reason for that is because your training to get better should be structured and it should have progressions. And CrossFit, with the constantly varied, that gets more challenging to have structure and progressions. That's something that we're extremely we put a lot of emphasis on through all of our programming. Is even if it's CrossFit, there should be a structure and a progression to almost everything that we're doing. But when you start competing, so much more time is spent doing intervals on the rower or structured strength programs, or if you need to get better at muscle ups, you're working on structured progressions. it becomes less about just having muscle ups in a workout and just having rowing in a workout and doing workouts back to back to back, which in the early days, it was who could kind of do the most CrossFit kind of became the best because they could tolerate the most volume. And then everybody started doing a lot. And then you had to kind of take a step back and go, how can I strategically improve areas that I'm not as good at? And we can't do that by just kind of randomly throwing them in a couple of times a week. But I think those things can still be applied to CrossFit to make it better, to have structured progressions with most things that you're doing so that you actually have trackable, measurable progress and you're working towards a goal.
Once I started to understand and see progress with progressions, you realize how valuable they can be. It's often like where people come in, and the thing about CrossFit is it could be random, right? And so, yeah, there is some randomness, like doing different styles of workouts. You're going to have AMRAPs, which means as many rounds as possible. You're going to have 4-time workouts, which means you have a set amount of work that you're doing within that time. Once you finish that work, you're done, and that's your time. You're going to have something called an EMOM, which some of you guys might have seen, which is every minute on the minute, where you're doing, say, 10 box jumps in the minute, and then you rest the remainder of that time. Then you do 12-calorie row, then you rest the remainder of that time. You're going to have interval training where you might go 3 minutes on, 1 minute off. You're going to have all of these different time domains. And then you're going to have AMRAPs, if I didn't touch on that, as many rounds and reps as possible in a set time domain. And so there's all these different ways to train. So that's what kind of gives it that random feeling. But you still need that progression like Patrick was talking about. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we find so much value in, and how we've been able to kind of blend the two. But those progressions are going to allow you to track your progress. And like he was saying, whether you're hybrid training or you're CrossFit training, like I'm huge fans of both. I dedicated my life to CrossFit. I absolutely love it. I also love some of the soloness and some of the challenges that come with the endurance world. And so it's fun to be able to go back and forth and just to be fit and to be able to do both. Like nobody says you have to choose. You don't have to say, hey, I'm hybrid, or hey, I'm CrossFit. You can do what you want to do that sets your soul on fire. And I think that's really important too.
I think hybrid training got a little bit more popular, picked up some steam largely, after the pandemic. More people were training at home. They're training out of their garage. They don't have maybe as much of a setup. They've got dumbbells, barbells, some strength training equipment, and everybody can run, and maybe a piece of conditioning equipment. So it's a little bit more minimal, which just puts a little bit more emphasis on the strength portion, and then conditioning portion, which can be a little bit separate. And then maybe hitting a CrossFit-ish style workout every now and then, but eliminating more of the high skill stuff where, maybe people don't have rings in their garage and that isn't as much of a priority, or ropes for rope climbs, things like that. But there's also just the lower barrier of entry of not having to learn as many skills. And is your priority maybe getting better at the skills because they're super fun? Like you want to learn double unders, you want to be able to do a snatch, you want to be able to do a kipping pull up. If those are priorities and you enjoy the process of learning those, CrossFit's got a lot to offer, and there's always going to be something new to learn. If you're like, I just want to be like fitter, and like I don't really care if I never do a double under, and if I never learn a muscle up, like it'd be fun, but I also just don't really care. It's a little bit easier to be in the hybrid style training where you're focused more on kind of traditional strength and conditioning, and then also maybe implementing some running or biking along with that. And it takes the time component out that is required to learn all of the skills.
The CrossFit time component and the hybrid time component are also very different. So a lot of times, like when you go into a CrossFit class, we've coached thousands of them, you're going to have a warm up, which is going to be, anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. You're probably going to have some sort of the strength component. Maybe that's back squats, or maybe one day we're working on our pull-ups and our rowing to strengthen our upper back. When I say rowing, such as like a horizontal pull with a vertical pull, or maybe we're doing a push-pull. So we have dumbbell pressing and pull-ups. Then from there, you're going to typically go into that conditioning piece. Well, because you have a 60-minute class time domain, a lot of times those conditioning pieces aren't going to be longer than 20 minutes. So that's usually going to be towards the top end of that CrossFit style training. And then when you go into that hybrid, the kind of like Patrick was saying, is like you have less of the skills. A lot of times, depending on how much time you have, you could split that up to where maybe you're doing like a slow, easy run in the morning, and then you're hitting a 30-minute strength session in the afternoon. Or maybe you're doing your 30-minute strength session, and then you're going for a 30 or 45-minute bike. So I think it just kind of depends also on how much time you have and what your day looks like, and how available you have, or how much time available you do have to train, and how you want to structure that if you're doubling up on some of those things. The other thing I would say is kind of looking at all of that, the community aspect, I think, and I'd love to hear what you think, but I do think as of recent, Strava Garmin, like all of these things have created, Zwift have created ways for people to build that community online, where previously I would say like not high rocks, I would say hybrid training is a little bit more solo. It's a little bit more individualized and personalized, where CrossFit, you're walking into these classes of 20 people. So I think that community feel is people who are looking for that really, really strong community where they're showing up to that class every single day. That might be taking them more towards that CrossFit style programming, where if they're looking to be able to do things on their own time, maybe a little bit more individualized, that might be taking them more towards that hybrid programming. And there are run clubs, but a lot of times it's a meetup once or twice a week just to get an easy run in. But it's a little bit different when you look at that community aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest selling points and biggest needle movers for most people who do CrossFit is the community aspect. And one that can be like actually meeting the community, meeting friends, being around people who are also into fitness, but also just the fact that having people around, having the music loud, somebody else is putting in a lot of effort. If they can do it, I can do it. Somebody's cheering you on, motivating you, where if you did that exact same workout at home, it just doesn't have the same intensity for a lot of people. And it definitely helps or it takes a certain type of person to be able to push to kind of get maybe the effectiveness or the stimulus out of some of these workouts, doing them by yourself. And there's certainly people who can do it, something you've done a lot of, but for most people, it kind of brings the best out of them doing it in a community environment.
Yeah, I'd say on the flip side too, I think that's a really great point. And I think it can go two ways. Like it can really encourage that intensity and make people push harder. It can also scratch people's competition itch, because you're doing this workout of the day, and a lot of the gym platforms have these leaderboards in CrossFit where you don't have to be on the leaderboard. You don't have to submit your score, but it can kind of give people, like we worked with a ton of people that, they'd been collegiate athletes or high school athletes, and they just missed having that one community and two, that kind of that competition that they could have. And so I think that is a very, very fine line to walk, because no one should be competing every single day. And I think that sometimes when you are chasing those scores in the CrossFit gym, it can be really hard to be like, wow, I'm really tired today and I just need to pull back and just get a good workout for myself. But because the intensity and the music's loud, and it can kind of drive a little bit more of a competitive environment, where if you have an easy run and you do go out by yourself, you know where your heart rate should be, you know what your pace should be, and you kind of just check off that easy run. You don't have these external factors that are necessarily driving that intensity that day.
I think people get a little bit protective over like the names or the what it means to do CrossFit or hybrid training, but like we were just talking about, if you walk into 10 different gyms, the structure that you were talking about is a structure that we've done and did for years as far as how we structured our classes. But you could go into a gym and all they do is one workout. And they might not even do a warm up.
That's a great point.
Or
Hero workouts would be a great example.
Just do a strength, and that's all they do that day. And to me, that's absolutely crazy. And we never structured things like that, even getting things in a 1 hour time window. But we always, and through all the programming that we do, there's always a high emphasis on strength training, hypertrophy work, which is a little bit different. There's a lot of crossover there, but then you can also layer in CrossFit with that. But no matter what training style you're doing, we put a very high priority on strength training and hypertrophy work, because I think that's the foundation for building a long-term healthy body and lifestyle. And you can kind of choose the type of conditioning that you want to do, whether that's running, biking, CrossFit, or something else. But I think everything kind of builds off the strength training.
I agree. And I think it's really fun to see so much emphasis being put on strength training. I feel like there are other styles of training. Like you can just do HIIT training. You could just do Orange Theory. You could do CrossFit. But as we continue to age, we lose our muscle mass. And so what we need to continue to live a long, sustainable, healthy life, we need to build that muscle mass early on. And the way to do that is with strength training.
There's a ton of benefits outside of just being stronger that come along with strength training.
I also think in the end, with that building that muscle, it's like, what do you enjoy? And so what are your goals, which is what we always come back to? Like, do you want to be strong? Do you want to be able to run far? Do you want to have a blend of both? Do you want to be able to do the Olympic weightlifting? Do you want to be able to do the gymnastics that we talked about? And I think those are things that you have to ask yourself. And I think once you can kind of work through that, then you can kind of start deciding like, okay, maybe I should go more towards this hybrid approach, or maybe I should go towards this CrossFit approach. But in the end, both approaches are gonna be great. And that's the most important thing, is finding something that works for you and what you enjoy, because whatever you enjoy and works for you, you will continuously do. And that will lead into consistency, and that will lead into results.
I also think it's okay to have like seasons. Like you don't have to be one or the other, and that is just all you do. I'm very openly a fair weather runner. So in the winter, I don't do a whole lot of running, and that's okay. I focus a little bit more on strength training and hypertrophy work. I'll do more rowing and some simpler conditioning style workouts that don't have as much high skill. And I just really enjoy that. When the summer comes around or the weather gets a little bit nicer, I'll get back to some running, and I enjoy that also. But I think it's fun to be able to mix things up and not just do the same thing, all year long. And if you don't want to.
I agree. I think that's so important to keeping it fresh. Like often, I think with that said though, you don't want to jump around every week. You don't want to jump around every day. You pick certain blocks, certain months that you work towards one thing. And I think that's a common question that a lot of people ask is, well, how do I know what program to choose? Or can I jump back and forth? Or can I choose pieces from all the programs if they have access to more than one program? And I think the most important thing is to pick something, like whatever that goal is, to pick a goal or to work towards your goal, and then to kind of pick a plan to help you get there. And then you can supplement if you need, but to make sure that you aren't just jumping ship every single day, picking pieces from all different programs or all these things that you're seeing online, because then you're never going to actually have those built-in progressions. You're not going to be able to track progress, and your body, you're not going to get better.
And I think that's something that we've been, good and lucky enough to be able to do, is the more that we have done different types of training and been around people who are experts in different fields, we learn more about training in general, so we can grow and evolve the type training that we do, take the best practices from, different people or types of training, and then apply those rather than just being kind of stuck in one mindset. This is the only way to do it. Being hard and fast in that rule, which I think can be limiting in the long run.
Yeah. Everybody's going to have their opinion. And I think, like you're saying, it's important to look at the science and look at the research and learn and figure out how you can apply that. And if you can, blend different things to get the results that you're looking for. And I think that is definitely something that we've been able to do, having some experience down at Westside, seeing different CrossFit Games athletes train. Every CrossFit Games athlete that I've ever met, we've touched on this in earlier episodes, trains so different. Seeing how different gyms run. We drop in when we're out of town, we take workouts, and it's fun to see how we're all doing fitness, we're all training, but things can be so different and people are still getting results. And so I think it's just finding what sticks and what works for you.
And yeah, CrossFit for a long time was so anti-bodybuilding. Actually, they still are. When we did programming for CrossFit.com, we had some accessory work in there that was, it was bodybuilding, and that's something that we normally include. And they didn't want that in there, which I find just hilarious. 'Cause it's like there's all kinds of great ways to exercise, and to eliminate certain portions of them is just odd to me. But
it was a bicep curl.
Like, who doesn't want to do some curls? And like, it's great to have that, like, stronger biceps. And specifically, like within CrossFit, if you want to say get better at pull-ups, you could either just kind of do pull-ups until hopefully you get better at them. And if you have the skill of doing pull-ups, like there's a point of diminishing returns once you're past that point. So it's like, okay, so how can we get better at these without maybe beating our body up, beating our hands up? We can actually work on getting our biceps or maybe our lats stronger through strength training and hypertrophy work, bodybuilding, without spending nearly as much time on the rig. And that can be applied to any movement within CrossFit or most styles of training. If you want to get better at handstand push-ups, are you stuck at the bottom? Are you stuck at the top? Once you get past maybe your head, you can't quite lock out. Like maybe we need to strengthen your triceps. And instead of just doing handstand push-ups all day long, we can do some targeted tricep work to get those stronger, which will then directly impact how good you are or your ability to do handstand push-ups.
Yeah, I think that goes for all the unilateral movements as well. We incorporate a ton of unilateral training in all of our plans, and that's to help our bigger primary compound movements, right? We need to be doing those smaller movements to isolate those muscle groups to make sure that we are strong and we can do the bigger, more sexier, fun movements. And I think if more people could recognize that sooner, it would prevent injuries. They would get stronger and their body would feel better overall.
Another kind of big difference between, I think, hybrid and CrossFit training is CrossFit is a methodology, but it's also a business. Like somebody owns it. It's coming from a corporation. Nobody owns hybrid training. Like it's just style, and it can mean a lot of things, but it's completely independent, which I think is cool. like strength and conditioning. Nobody owns strength and conditioning, and that can also be applied in a lot of different ways. And I just find that to be like kind of an interesting difference between the two different styles of training.
I do too, actually. Now when you phrase it like that, I've never really thought of it like that. I think when I originally heard the term hybrid, I felt interesting enough, kind of like intimidated by that term. Like, I like to run and I like to lift. Does that make me a hybrid athlete? Or because I've done CrossFit and I've competed at a CrossFit Games, am I only allowed to be a CrossFit athlete? And just be curious, like your thoughts on that. I've listened to a lot of podcasts on that. And I just think that in the end, it's always, for me, you guys probably heard me say this over and over, but it always comes back to what are your goals? And that should be your North Star. And just because somebody says that you're not signing up in this race, that you can't be a hybrid athlete, I kind of feel like that's a little silly. Like if I'm training to push big weights and I'm training to run far and fast, like to me, that's trying to improve both of those simultaneously, which to me is the definition of hybrid.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to help people get in the best shape of their lives. And I think you can do that a lot of different ways. And only including or excluding people by what their accomplishments are, I don't think makes any sense. And I don't think that's very inclusive for the fitness community as a whole. And if you're doing CrossFit, you may be doing on-ramp and going to your first few CrossFit classes. Does that make you a CrossFitter? Or do you have to have done a competition to be a CrossFitter? It's like, I just don't think that's very helpful. Like if you're working towards your fitness, you're enjoying it, you've got goals and you're making progress, call it what you want. Like, I really don't care. I don't think that it even matters that much either. If you're training some strength training and then you're trying to run your first mile in under 10 minutes, does that make you a hybrid athlete? Like if that's what you're enjoying, like that's awesome. I don't think you need to be able to run a marathon or a sub 3-hour marathon to be a hybrid athlete. Like, I think that there just becomes a distinction there between the competitive aspect and the people doing it, which is the majority of people, that isn't necessarily helpful. And in the same way that CrossFit Games athletes are a totally different style of training athlete than like what's happening at a gym, the people that want to run under a 10-minute mile are totally different than the people trying to deadlift 500 pounds and run a two whatever marathon. Like it's just two different things. And for the vast majority of people, that's not a goal or even maybe on the radar anyway.
I was just curious your take on that. I think that's a really great way to look at it. And that's how I look at it, is inclusivity. Sometimes working out can be hard enough. And I feel like we talk to people all the time about this, but it's like, there's so many other things going on in your life. It's finding what fits for you and finding what works. And if that's going out on a 45-minute run on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then having a 45-minute strength session on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, you're doing 3 days of running and 3 days of strength training. Hey, that works. If that's hitting 5 CrossFit classes a week for you, Monday through Friday, and then getting your weekends with your family because you have young kids or your kids are in sports or you just want to spend time with your significant others, like that works. I think more than anything, there is no one size fits all. And we used to talk about this all the time. It's what you believe in and what you're willing to put all of your effort into that's really going to help you achieve your goals. And so whether you're looking at hybrid training or you're looking at CrossFit training, there are a lot of differences like we talked about, but which one is going to get you to where you feel fulfilled and helping you achieve your goals?
And it's not everybody, but like there'll be people kind of chattering, kind of deciding who is and isn't, a hybrid athlete or a CrossFit athlete. But both CrossFit and hybrid athletes, like they're both pretty niche still. Like they're small. By splitting hairs of like who's doing what in something that's already pretty small, I don't think is helpful for just fitness as a whole. It's like we want more people doing fitness. We want more people going out and doing runs or joining CrossFit. Like fitness, it's great. And I think it is on an upward trend, but like we want that momentum, not to be like dividing who is doing what and like who's allowed to call themselves like what name. I think it's great. Like we live in a neighborhood that's got a lot of families in it. And it's shocking how many like high schoolers, middle schoolers we see out running.
It is the coolest thing. Yeah. Biking and running. It is unbelievable.
Like these kids that like clear, like some of them you see in athletics and some of them it's like they're being positively influenced to go out and like start running. And you can tell that's what's happening. And when I was in high school, like there was zero of that. Like there was the people who did sports and trained for their sport. But like if you weren't doing that, I don't ever remember seeing anyone
It's because you were on the mountain the whole time.
maybe, but like, I just don't remember that. I mean,
I don't remember it either. I was just kidding.
so in high school, you didn't, I have to imagine, like, you didn't just go out for a run, did you?
Yeah. The only time I would go out for a run was when I was in soccer season, and I knew that I was going to get my butt kicked because I was out of shape, and I had to show up and run 120s at soccer practice. And so I would go out and work on it myself because I wanted to not be the slowest one that had to continue making the team do more and more 120s. And so I was just like always aware of those things. And I like fitness, so I would go out and run, and I had my routes around the neighborhood, but not more than 3 miles. And the only reason I was doing it was to be better at my sport. There was no, I'm just going to go out and run or bike or anything like that. That stuff didn't come until I was graduating from college.
Yeah. So I do think like there's plenty of negatives to social media, but I think that is definitely one positive, is that it is definitely becoming more common to see people aspiring to be fitter and more athletic because they have peers that they see doing it. So it's like, I do think that's a really positive thing.
I couldn't agree more. I always like when I see them run by the house or I'm walking and they're out, it just makes me smile from ear to ear. It's like, I wish I would have had that when I was that age. And I just can't wait to see, how that continues to affect generations to come.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about like when I was in high school, we had the full on like CD player with the corded headphones that, at some point like it got like the anti-skip. So it didn't skip as much if you were like moving it around. So like, I'm just picturing like going out with like a couple CDs and carrying that thing around for a run when I was in high school. And it just seems so bizarre to me now.
And then it boiled down to the little iPad or the iPod mini. Did you ever have one of those? It's like just that little thing you could just like tuck in your pocket.
Well, I don't even remember what it was. It went from like CD to
MP3?
No, it was like a little smaller disc. It was like a CD, but it was smaller. It didn't it immediately went like skip past that to like MP3. But I remember going to that, just being like, well, it can't get any smaller than this. Like, this has got to be just like the peak of how small like one of these music devices can get. And then like almost immediately it went like MP3 player and then iPad. So it was like, oh, there's like leaps that you just can't even imagine that happened really quickly.
That is really crazy to think about. Yeah. Running with a little compact disc player, a CD. Some people listening to this might not even know what a CD is. No, I'm kidding. I hope that's not the case. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Anyways, back to training. I think what we've kind of touched on throughout this without maybe directly saying it, as Patrick kind of said it at the start, is no matter which one you choose, there are specific events within those umbrellas. So with hybrid, you're going to have things like the tactical games, you're going to have DECA comp, and then you're also going to have high rocks. Within CrossFit, you're going to have the CrossFit Games. And so those are specific things that people are specifically training for. And so those could be like specific events. You can also have, a half marathon or a triathlon falling under that hybrid if they're adding strength training in there. But those are kind of more like even more nuanced, like I'm half marathon or half Ironman training today versus if I'm training for high rocks, I might be incorporating things that you also might see in CrossFit. So I think it's just really important to recognize there are specific events under both of these umbrellas.
I think the more of them there are, the better. And, it's great to have different options for people. I mean, high rocks is getting really big right now and like, it's fun. It's cool. And it's easily accessible. The DECA is coming up. We've got quite a few people who have done those and had a total blast with it. CrossFit's something that people can do local competitions, or you can strive to maybe pursue a higher competition, standard or, a higher level competition there as well. But there's a lot of avenues if you enjoy competing, and it's fun to be able to do different ones also. And I think largely just getting out of the gym is also I think getting out of the gym is just a good thing in itself as well. I grew up again with all the action sports. I want to do outside stuff, being outside the gym. And I do see maybe one kind of like downfall to CrossFit is the better you get, the more your aspirations are for competing in CrossFit, just the more and more time you spend in the gym rather than outside the gym. And with hybrid, maybe the goal isn't necessarily like there's no hybrid games, at least yet. I guess we'll see.
I guess the closest thing would probably be like the High Rocks Elite 15. Like they train a lot. I follow some of them on social media and they train a lot.
Well, I just mean for hybrid training itself, like that's High Rocks. So I don't consider that like hybrid training. That is hybrid training, but I think of hybrid training to not be so specific. You are specifically training if you want to be good at High Rocks. So, there's a lot of running, but I don't think the weights are nearly as important in high rocks. And I think you can get away with not being very strong at all and being excellent at high rocks. And I think the goal with hybrid training is to gain strength as well as endurance and be able to kind of push both of those forward somewhat, congruently at the same time, maybe periodizing a little bit here and there, but making sure that you're trying to get better at both. And with high rocks, I think you can kind of pull off the gas for strength training once you meet a pretty low bar. But I guess what I mean by that is, like, at least with hybrid training, you can get outside and you can run, you can get outside and you can bike, you can go outside and do a trail run. The gym time doesn't become more and more and more demanding. You can get a good strength session done in 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour.
Yeah, that's definitely something we firsthand experienced. Was starting CrossFit was for me all, and with you, was because we wanted to be able to do the things we loved outside the gym, which you hit on. Like, we loved rock climbing, and to be able to have the strength to pull yourself up the wall is important in rock climbing. Obviously, there's a ton of technique that goes into that, but to be able to go hiking and to do challenging hikes, that stuff in the gym is going to prepare you for that. And I think, like you said, the more into it you got, the more time it demanded. And then all of a sudden, some of the reasons I started this, those hobbies, we had less and less time for them. And so I think that's just something for people to be aware of. And that, again, circles back to what are your goals. And so just being aware of, like, why you're starting and what your goals are, so that way you're not getting sucked in and all of a sudden you're losing all these hobbies and things that you love, or maybe why you started in the first place. I don't regret any time, energy, or effort we spent in the gym. That's what we needed to do, and that's what it required. And it was really cool to see some of the things we were able to accomplish by making those sacrifices. But it is important, like, we believe in fitness and training so you can do everything and anything that you want to do, that you're ready for anything that comes your way. And I full-heartedly, like, I just love that about fitness, and I love that about training, is that you train your body and your mind so that you can handle whatever's thrown at you. I do think that you might catch a little flack for saying high rocks isn't hybrid. So I get what you're saying. And so what he's saying when he says low bar, I think what we're talking about is 1 rep maxes. I think the sleds are heavy in high rocks, but what you're seeing is that it's a very, very small percentage of that race. So if the sleds are taking you 2 minutes to push the sled, let's say 4 minutes, but the race is taking you 90 minutes, the percentage that you are actually spending on those sleds is very, very, very small. So once you have a certain amount of strength and you can sustain the power for that 4-minute domain, having a bigger, stronger 1 rep max isn't necessarily going to help you move that sled better. And I think that's essentially what you're referring to.
Yeah, I think high rocks is a hybrid style of training, but kind of coming back to, like, the business portion, like, high rocks is a business similar to CrossFit's a business. And my point was that hybrid is kind of something that I think stands on its own and doesn't need a business model to prop it up or make it popular or define what it is, in the way that both CrossFit and high rocks kind of do. There's a lot of different, ideas that go along that kind of spread out from each of those, but they're both rooted in a business. And I think high rocks is great. They're super fun. I think it's a great sport. They're definitely hybrid athletes for sure, but it doesn't require the same amount of strength. And even the sleds, like, we've been to a bunch of races, I haven't seen anybody not be able to push or pull one. It is certainly harder for some people than others, but it's not necessarily a barrier to entry. Like, you'll be able to push it for the most part. And the biggest portion that you have that you can either kind of gain time or lose time if you're racing is the run. Conditioning far outweighs any sort of the strength that you're going to be able to put forward to make up ground on somebody. You could be super, super strong and keep putting on strength, and you're not really going to shave a whole lot of time off your race time. The better you get at running, the more time you're going to shave off. And the better runners with the most work capacity are the ones that are able to excel in high rocks. It's not the strongest people by any means.
Yeah, I would say work capacity is the key there. It's like learning to be able to control that heart rate in high rocks. And I think that's absolutely a big piece of it, but I agree with that for sure. And I do think that it's really cool to see it coming up, though, in the way that CrossFit also has. And I love both of them, is the community. Like, when you leave a good CrossFit event, it's so much fun. You're just ecstatic. Like, the community is amazing. the best day. When you leave a High Rocks and you are, there watching other people race and give it their all, and then you get to do your race and you leave. It's the same feeling. It's just such a high. And so if those are things that excite you and drive you, like I would definitely check out, whether that's competing in a local CrossFit competition. I'll never forget my first one, or signing up for a High Rocks race. I would encourage you sign up with a buddy to start, do the doubles. And then if you really love it, go into the singles, but make it part of the training. And that makes it fun. It gives you these little checkpoints and little things to look forward to that are community driven along the way.
Meet some other people who are into fitness. You see other people who are in shape, that are working hard, that are doing cool things. It's just motivating for you to also do more of that. And I think that's good for everybody.
Yeah, it's good for everybody. I mean, countless times, I feel like most people would say this. You put all the work in all the time, like you show up regularly, you're working hard, whether you're training for a race or not. But then if you are signed up for a race, maybe you're just going to train a little bit harder. Maybe you're not going to skip your workouts. And so I think it's another way of building in some accountability when maybe you feel like you need that accountability.
So hopefully this was helpful for you guys today. If you want us to get more in the weeds on training, whether that's CrossFit, hybrid, High Rocks, let us know in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Spotify, I think you can put, or listening on Spotify, I think you can put comments there as well. Or shoot us a DM. Let us know what you guys think and what you guys would want to hear more of. By the next time you guys listen, Kristi will have already run her marathon, and we'll know she hit her sub 3 hour goal, and we'll give you guys an update there. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll catch you in the next one.